Hello, and welcome to Trans Truth, the podcast dedicated to dispelling myths, fear, and ignorance about transgender people. Along the way, we'll be sharing items of interest to the transgender community, from political and news events to health, fashion, and beauty. And now, let's have a look at some news items that should be of interest to our listeners. Business Insider reports that a group calling itself Do No Harm is behind many of the anti-trans laws that have been considered and passed in many states during this legislative session. The Associated Press analyzed 130 bills across 40 states, finding common language attributable to a group called Do No Harm. Do No Harm is one of several right-wing hate groups advocating against trans inclusion in healthcare. Nearly identical pieces of anti-LGBTQ legislation are popping up in state legislatures across the country, and it's no coincidence. From bathroom bills to Don't Say Gay legislation, lawmakers pushing restrictive policies are creating a patchwork of legal, anti-trans, anti-queer discrimination across the country. The Associated Press, after analyzing those 130 bills, discovered that much of the wording from these anti-trans bills comes from conservative hate groups like Do No Harm and the Family Research Council. If you know anything about medicine, you'll probably recognize the irony of a group calling itself Do No Harm, arguing to ban life-saving health care for trans people. The promise of primum non nocere, or first do no harm, has been a fundamental guiding principle of healers since the time of the Greeks. It was the first thing I learned when studying to become a paramedic, and it's one of the first things that doctors learn as they enter medical school. Anyway, this group of posers wants to pass laws that, according to virtually all of the real experts in the field, will cause harm to transgender individuals. Business Insider is also reporting that a new Russian bill could ban transgender healthcare entirely in that country, along with prohibiting changes to the gender marker on public records. If that sounds familiar, it should. What we'd like to know is if the Republican Party is proud of having the party of Putin imitating them. Some good news out of Southern California. The Lompoc Unified School District has publicly pledged support for transgender youth in that district, with the adoption of a resolution that commits to, quote, a safe and inclusive learning environment for all students, unquote. That commitment will include ongoing professional development for all employees on gender identity issues. We applaud this wise and compassionate position taken by that community's educators. Station KATC, Acadiana's news channel, is reporting that Republican legislators in Louisiana's capital are trying to resurrect a bill that would ban gender-affirming health care for transgender minors. That bill appeared to have been killed when the Republican-dominated Senate Health and Welfare Committee voted 5-4 to sideline the bill. The deciding vote came from Republican Committee Chairman Senator Fred Mills, who had clashed repeatedly with the bill's sponsor. As with many of the virtually identical bills introduced in state legislatures in red states, this bill is filled with claims from conservative hate groups, Christian conservatives, and a small group of physicians, most likely from the group mentioned in our top story. Fortunately, reason held sway with the committee after doctors, psychologists, and transgender residents descended on the state capitol in Baton Rouge. Welcome to this very special episode of Trans Truth. I am your host, Kelly Nelson. Jerry Ann is on assignment. We've been talking a lot lately about the fear-mongering being done by the Republicans at the state level, introducing and passing legislation intended to make life difficult or impossible for transgender people. Up until very recently, I've been saying that this is nothing more than a cruelly cynical strategy to motivate their base. Another think of the children appeal to fearful and ignorant voters. But as I've studied what's happening, with an eye towards history, I fear that this may be the early stages of a much darker path for our society. Anyway, I should also point out that I do not use those words, fearful and ignorant, in a derogatory sense. Yes, there are those who are willfully ignorant and who are fully deserving of all the derision that can be heaped upon them. But most of those I refer to as fearful and ignorant are, in a very real way, crippled by their fears of something they know almost nothing about. Cognitive dissonance makes it almost painful for them to even consider information that conflicts with their comfortable worldview. So fear-mongering has been a remarkably effective strategy to get out the rube vote. And indeed, there are now a handful of studies that appear to indicate that there is a group of the population who actually need an authority of some kind to let them know what is right and what is wrong. The tragedy, of course, is that there are those who understand this and are willing to exploit it. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, famously said, "Propaganda works best when those who are being manipulated are confident that they are acting on their own free will." It's worth noting here that, in the context of conversations about transgender and drag groups, there is already a built-in bias amongst a majority of the population who genuinely believe that it's just common sense that gender is the same as biological sex. We'll be talking more about that finding in an upcoming episode. Anyway, given that pre-existing bias, a good propaganda campaign already has a head start. Unfortunately, I can't provide attribution for the source of this, but I recently came across the 9 fundamental principles of propaganda, which should ring familiar to anyone who's been paying attention. Number 1, the big lie. Always choose the big lie over the small. The masses will believe it more readily. 2, focus. Use only 1 or at most 2 selling points. 3, repeat. Use them over and over until even your enemies know them by heart. 4, blame. Never waver. Acknowledge no doubt. Always blame. Never credit the other side. Debase, defame, dehumanize. 5, provoke. First attract attention, then appeal to emotions. 6, crisis. Shades of gray don't work. Issues must be life, death, good, evil, freedom, slavery, love, hate. 7, emotional symbols. Good slogans have no literal meaning, only a strong emotional appeal. 8, pander. Ignore intellectuals and reasonable arguments. Target the unthinking masses with powerful emotional pitches. And 9, no limits. Ignore all moral limits whenever you deem it useful. This political strategy, and the propaganda techniques being employed to sell it, is chillingly similar to that employed, with similar remarkable effectiveness, in 1930s Germany. Oh, I can hear it now, the cries of, "Foul! She's bringing up Hitler!" So at this point, I should note that as a veteran of online forums since way before there was a commercially available internet, I'm talking CompuServe and Usenet, so get off my lawn and go Google those terms. Back in the days of yore, an attorney and author, Mike Godwin, came up with what has become known as Godwin's Law. Godwin's Law holds that the longer an online discussion goes on, the probability of a comparison to Nazis and/or Hitler approaches certainty. Godwin's Law even now enjoys an entry in the Oxford English Dictionary, so it's definitely a thing. And generally, it's true. The reckless use of hyperbole in an online debate is almost always a total rookie move. That, however, may no longer be entirely true. Even Godwin himself noted in 2015 how Donald Trump was being compared to, you guessed it, Nazis and Hitler. Said Godwin, "If you're thoughtful about it and show some real awareness of history, go ahead and refer to Hitler when you talk about Trump or any other politician." As an armchair historian and online debater of some 30-plus years' experience, I am keenly aware of history and how it appears that it is being repeated. Here's some thoughts on invoking Nazis, Hitler, and other hyperbolic claims. First of all, no, there are no ovens, no gas chambers, nor any calls to literally exterminate us. So, referring to the right-wing nuts campaign to make us disappear as genocide is a bit over the top. Nuance is all too often lost on the masses, so invoking images of the Nazi death camps at this point only works against us. I have been involved in an ongoing debate with an online friend about such hyperbole. She's of the opinion that we should be referring to the GOP's anti-trans state legislative campaigns as genocide. I am of the opinion that it's not that, yet, and that calling it that, according to Godwin's law, damages our credibility. This is not to say that they aren't doing many of the same things the Nazis did in the early 1930s. They are, and I consider it not hyperbolic in the least to make some specific observation about those similarities. We're going to dive into the chilling similarities in a bit. In the interest of presenting both sides to the "is it genocide or not" question, I refer you to an article published by the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention, entitled Statement on the Genocidal Nature of the Gender-Critical Movement's Ideology and Practice. That is a mouthful. Anyway, as always, there's a link to this very thought-provoking article in the episode notes at www.transtruth.info. In the article, the authors make the case that genocide is a continuous process, and each step along the way can, arguably, be called genocidal. I'd also like to thank my friend for sharing Gregory H. Stanton's 10 Stages of Genocide with me. It provides a very useful framework to view both 1930s Germany and the GOP's hate campaigns in contemporary United States. The list, hosted on the website of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, link in the episode notes, says that genocide never just happens. There is always a set of circumstances which occur or which are created to build the climate in which genocide can take place, and that, at each of the earlier stages, there is an opportunity for members of the community or the international community to halt the stages and stop genocide before it happens. These stages are listed and explained as follows. 1. Classification. The differences between people are not respected. There's a division of us and them which can be carried out using stereotypes or excluding people who are perceived to be different. 2. Symbolization. This is a visual manifestation of hatred. Jews in Nazi Europe were forced to wear yellow stars to show that they were different. 3. Discrimination. The dominant group denies civil rights or even citizenship to identified groups. The 1935 Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of their German citizenship, made it illegal for them to do many jobs or to marry German non-Jews. 4. Dehumanization. Those perceived as different are treated with no form of human rights or personal dignity. During the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, Tutsis were referred to as cockroaches. The Nazis referred to Jews as vermin. 5. Organization. Genocides are always planned. Regimes of hatred often train those who go on to carry out the destruction of a people. 6. Polarization. Propaganda begins to be spread by hate groups. The Nazis used the newspaper Der Stürmer to spread and incite messages of hate about Jewish people. 7. Preparation. Perpetrators plan the genocide. They often use euphemisms, such as the Nazis' phrase, "the final solution," to cloak their intentions. They create fear of the victim group, building up armies and weapons. 8. Persecution. Victims are identified because of their ethnicity or religion, and death lists are drawn up. People are sometimes segregated into ghettos, deported, or starved, and property is often expropriated. Genocidal massacres begin. 9. Extermination. The hate group murders their identified victims in a deliberate and systematic campaign of violence. Millions of lives have been destroyed or changed beyond recognition through genocide. 10. Denial. The perpetrators or later generations deny the existence of any crime. In an article published at wearequeeraf.com, Marty Davies tells us that 90 years ago, this month, on the 6th of May, 1933, the world's first transgender clinic was broken into and occupied by Nazis. The article is a fascinating read, and I highly recommend it to our listeners to make time to read it. As always, a link to the article is in the notes for this episode on www.transtruth.info, as is a link to another site mentioned in the article that documents the history of that first ever transgender clinic. Again, that article is worth your time, if for no other reason than to acquaint you with the twisted history of the clinic and its founder. Look, it's no secret how Nazi Germany ultimately viewed the Jews. That view was that Jewish people were so vile, so evil, so unworthy of living that they were exterminated by the millions. It would be a mistake to make the claim that the GOP is just like the Nazis who tried to exterminate an entire people. That would be absurdly hyperbolic because the GOP is not calling for genocide in so many words. And in the early 1930s, neither were the Nazis. What they did do during that first 6 years of Hitler's dictatorship was pass hundreds of local, state, regional, and national regulations and decrees which systematically took away the rights and property of Jewish people. And the things that the so-called conservatives are calling for right now are chillingly similar to the anti-Jewish laws and regulations in pre-World War II Germany. To wit, March 31, 1933, the Berlin Commissioner of Health decreed that Jewish doctors would no longer receive compensation from the City Health Insurance Institute for any treatment they provide. In 2023, in multiple states, the GOP is attempting to ban the reimbursement for any evidence-based, gender-affirming care for minors and, in some cases, even for adults, or to ban those medical treatments outright. April 1, 1933, the superintendent of Berlin Public Schools orders the immediate dismissal of all Jewish educators. Today, we have Don't Say Gay laws, book bans, and other restrictions on anything that might tell a truth about anything that makes so-called conservatives uncomfortable. April 7, 1933, the law for the restoration of the professional services removes Jews from government service. Today, legislators daring to speak truth to anti-transgender laws are silenced. Riot police are used to keep protesters from being heard in state legislatures. And Republican legislators routinely break procedural rules to avoid mandatory periods for public comment on their anti-trans legislation. April 7, 1933, Jewish lawyers are forbidden from being admitted to the bar. April 25, 1933, the Sports Commissioner of the Reich issues rules forbidding Jews from membership in athletic teams or clubs. In 2023, Republican-sponsored legislation in multiple states will ban transgender athletes from competition. May 13, 1933. Jews may change their names only to other Jewish names. July 14, 1933. The denaturalization law removes the citizenship of naturalized Jews and other undesirables. In 2023, Republican legislation in multiple states will outlaw gender marker changes on birth certificates and other legal documents. In 2023, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, in a flagrant violation of federal privacy laws, is requesting information from public colleges about students who have sought hormone treatments or gender confirmation surgery. October 4, 1933. Jews are banned from making editorial posts. March 5, 1934. The Ministry of the Reich for Popular Enlightenment calls for any performance by a Jewish actor to be outlawed. And today, drag performances are being outlawed. Remember, genocide does not just happen. It's a progression of changes in a society or culture, often taking place over years or even decades until, finally, the extermination of the target group becomes acceptable. Let us, each and every one of us, do what we can to avert this possible end by intervening however we can in the early stages. The Trans Truth episodes on activism and ambassadorship should give you some ideas, but if nothing else, just be present. Let the world see who we really are, so that they can more readily realize that we are human beings, that we are their fellow citizens with the same rights to the liberty and justice for all that so many of us pledge to uphold. My friend Rose Bowen says that trans women have two important distinctions for conservatives. They are daily examples of women exercising bodily autonomy, and two, there are very few of them, so most people don't know someone openly transgender, and therefore they are easier to lie about. Thank you, Rose. Point number 2 is why Trans Truth exists and why we felt the need to add a new feature to our website, www.transtruth.info. We've added an FAQ list. Also, on each episode of our podcast, we'll feature one of those frequently asked questions. Look, here's one now. What does transgender mean? As it turns out, that term has become rather slippery. It's been used by the professional community as an umbrella term used to describe any type of atypical expression of gender, and that includes cross-dressers, gender fluid, non-binary, and transsexuals. Today, however, the term transgender is conventionally reserved for those whose gender identity is other than the gender that they were assigned at birth or their biological sex. Oh yes, we're splitting hairs a bit here, but we do feel that agreeing on the terminology is essential to effective communication, and we are all about effective communication. You've been listening to Trans Truth, the podcast that speaks the truth about what it means to be transgender. We hope that you have found this episode to be informative and enlightening, whether you're transgender yourself, you have a friend or loved one who's transgender, or especially if you're simply looking forward to understanding more about the transgender experience. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at www.transtruth.info. That's .info. This podcast is copyright 2023 Trans Truth.